In verse 22, it says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law." Now, we've been going through these, and we are to the word meekness. So, meekness is our subject this morning. Let's ask God for His help. Father, we are thankful for the day you have given us to be here, and we ask that you would open up your word to us this morning and teach us what you have written about meekness, that we might be able to understand it and embrace it. And Father, that we would allow the Spirit to work in our lives, that we would yield to His leading and His control. Amen. So, I keep saying, don't forget this. There's a reason that God tells us things He wants us to do or to be. And in the bulk of the cases that we face in the Scriptures where God is telling us to do something or to be something, it is because that is who He is. And He is making us like Himself. There would be minor exceptions to that in the Scriptures where, based on who we are, quite different from God, we would need to do something that wouldn't necessarily be a specific quality that God had, depending on how you look at the situation. God made man in His own image. And when God made man in His own image, He wanted man to be like Him. And hence, every single thing that God has taught to man in basic form has been teaching us to be like Him. So when we read this word meekness, the fruit of the Spirit is meekness. You could turn to find out if God has anything to do, if God is anything like this, you could turn to Matthew chapter 11, and we will read it right from the lips of the Son of God. Matthew 11 and verse 28, Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, many times when we would perhaps think of the word meekness, we are relating it to the fact that we are sinners. If we think of the word humble or meek, which actually the words humble and meek are very close to the same thing. If we think of words like that and we relate them to our own sinfulness, why should we be, let's say, why should I not judge Dale for his sin? Well, because I'm a sinner too, right? But when it comes down to it, if that's the reason, if that's the only reason that I should not judge Dale, then why would it be that God would not judge Dale? Because God was not a sinner. Why did God, sitting up in heaven, determine that He was willing to sacrifice His own Son to pay for Dale's sin so He wouldn't have to judge Dale? When God had no sin, He could have looked down on him and condemned him and would have been right. It would have been just for God to have been mad at Dale for being a sinner. But He didn't. So it's right for me to say I shouldn't judge Dale because I would be condemning myself also because I'm a sinner. But that isn't going all the way. Because if we go all the way, then if we're going to be like God, God is not judgmental by nature. In fact, it says that judgment in the Old Testament somewhere, I think this is in the Psalms, it says that judgment is His strange work. It's like the thing He has to do when he's forced into it, because after he did everything that he could to prevent his judgment on man, we still rejected him, and therefore he is forced to judge us when he tried so hard to get out of it. But it's not the thing that he delights in or wants to do. And so if we think of the word meek, and we apply that to ourselves, we should be meek because we are a sinner. We should be humble because we are a sinner. We should be all these things because we have no value intrinsically. We're so fallen and so wrong, and should abase ourselves. And so we can think of it in that respect, but the fact of the matter is, these qualities that we're talking about are qualities that God himself possesses, and he was not a sinner. Okay? So, Jesus says very plainly, I am meek and lowly in heart. So, one day Jesus will sit on a throne on this earth, and he will rule the entire earth. Will Jesus act like Donald Trump when he rules the earth? No, he will not act like any of the rulers of this earth, because as sinners, when we become exalted into a position of power and authority, we think of ourselves as not sure how to say this now. Let's just say it puts a bad attitude in a person when they get into that position. They exalt themselves above the people. Jesus is not going to do that when he sits on the throne. Jesus is going to be in charge, and he is going to require righteousness across the entire earth. But is he doing it for his benefit or for our benefit? Is his attitude going to be a lofty attitude? You remember in the book of Esther how the queen is not even allowed, though she's married to the king, she's not even allowed to walk into the presence of the king. It's against the law for her even to walk into the presence of the king. And for her to go in and see the king to make a request for her life, she has to break a rule of it and get the king to make an exception for her, so he himself doesn't kill her for coming into his presence. What a king. That's not the kind of a king that Jesus is. We've been studying in Hebrews, and remember what we just went through recently, that we should boldly enter into the holiest place and go right to the throne of God, because that's our invitation from God. There is no barrier between us and God. God is not exalted so high above us that he doesn't want to see us or talk to us. He's not so proud or in his own little corner that he wouldn't want to play a game with us because we wouldn't have the capabilities of hey, listen. Now, I'm talking about a true thing. Some of you young people here, think about this for a minute. How much fun do you have playing with a game who can't play? Who you could beat any time, who doesn't have the ability to think or process the rules. You know, if God really had that kind of an attitude, he would care less if he ever saw us again. Because just think of the difference of the level of his understanding and ours. And when we come to him, we come as a creeping little worm without the ability to even communicate in his place of understanding. And then we come and we try to tell him what's right. And we try to tell him what he's supposed to do to us or for us or in this situation. And he sits there in mercy, and he actually tells us to come and pray. He says, I want you to pray. I want you to come and ask for things. And if we just made this one prayer and just said, God, you know everything so much better than me, do what is right for me, he wouldn't like that. That's not what he wants. It's the truth, but it's not what he wants. It's not what he has asked for. He has asked for us to come daily before him and present our petitions before his face of the things that we need from him. That's what he asks. That's what he wants. Because God's attitude is not a human attitude, where that sinful attitude where we are elevated above people. God is not that kind of a God. He does not have that kind of a character. So Jesus says, you can come to me, all of you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You can take my yoke and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls. So this is the character of God, this meekness, and this is why the Spirit of God will bring this fruit into the life of a Christian. Now, in Matthew chapter 5, one verse here, Matthew 5:5 says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." We'll get deeper into exactly what that means later in the morning. But just take this right now. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, I have heard many people talk about the necessity of standing up for their rights. You guys know people who talk about standing up for their rights? If I don't stand up for my rights, people will trample all over me, they say. Yeah? But Jesus said the exact opposite of that when he said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." So here we go. If I don't stand up for my rights, people will trample all over me. So I will stand up for my rights, and I will take things for myself, and I will not listen to God, and I will not be like God. And then someday I will face the judgment of God. Or I can say, I will be like God. I will let people walk all over me. I will be kind to my enemies, as Jesus told me I had to be. I will forgive those who have wronged me. I will suffer loss, and I will accept it from God. I will be right. And that person is under the eternal blessing of God because they accepted Jesus as Lord. So the meek will inherit the earth. Now, if you go back to Psalm 37, we'll expand on this just a little bit because it says the basic same thing in Psalm 37. But I want to read the first 11 verses of Psalm 37. So fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass, and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, so shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Now really what he's really starting this psalm out with is the same thing that we were just talking about, the meek inheriting the earth. He's really talking about the fact that there are people who trample on people to get things in this world. And there are people who get trampled on in this world. And which one do you want to be? The evildoers who prosper in the way are the people who take advantage of people and mistreat people to gain their ends and so on. And they shall be cut down like the grass, it says. But we are supposed to trust in the Lord and do good. And God promises us, so shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. In other words, in spite of the fact that if you live a meek life where you let people take advantage of you and you aren't wrong to anybody else, he will take care of you. Okay? But keep reading. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. Now, very, very, very clearly in this psalm, we are talking about the difference between the meek and the ungodly. The ungodly are those who trample on people to gain ends, and who are rude, wrong, or a million other words you could use to their fellow man because it advantages themselves. Now, you want a prime example of this? You can just look across our nation right now at the government of the United States, from federal to local levels. And this is how the government runs the country. The government does not run the country. They do some, and all governments have this one thing in common, that they are there for the protection of the people. And they do some of that. But when you actually look at the way they run their system of things, they run for the advantage of the government and for those who are in it. Now, what does the Bible say about them? They're going to be cut off. And what does the Bible say about us? Fret not thyself because of them. Now, that's a tough one for Christians because we're supposed to fight, aren't we? That's what our mindset is that we're supposed to fight the government. That's like almost the second most important thing in churches these days in the United States, I think, is that we're supposed to fight the government. Isn't that out of line? God did put the government over us. He did not put us over the government. But he will one day make this world straight. So the meek, he says, will inherit the earth. Now, switching gears, let's go back to the New Testament, to the book of 1 Peter and chapter 3. And we'll read the first 5 verses. 1 Peter 3, verse 1 says, Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives, whilst they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair, and of wearing of gold, and of putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in the old time the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. So we find in this passage in the New Testament that God is holding out this meek and quiet spirit as something that he values very greatly, something that he puts a high dollar value on, if you want to put it in our own language. Something that has very high value is somebody who has a meek and quiet spirit. But what happens is, what he is describing in this passage is what that meek and quiet spirit will be like, or what it would do. And the submission is what is coming out in this passage. Now, interestingly enough, I know this is a favorite passage with a lot of conservative churches, let's say. We fight with the idea that the world has on the subject of the relationship in marriage. And we want to fight out for God that the husband is the head of the wife. Okay, that's how God set things up. And that is true. The husband is the head of the wife. And so this is a favorite passage in conservative churches. But if you want to get what Peter is actually saying here, you really have to get the context of the book and understand that this is not an isolated 5 verses, but this is a subject that he is talking about in this book throughout the book. Listen. Turn over 2 chapters to chapter 5 and read the first 5 verses. The elders who are among you I exhort, who am also an elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being samples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. All right, so he's talking in these verses about the people who have authority in the church, those who are elders or rulers in the church, and teaching them how they should rule. We are not to rule like the men of this world rule in the church. We are not lords over the church. We are servants to the church. Any ruler in a church is a servant to the church. That will be our title. So we are supposed to lead by example. Now, granted, this is not the only passage on this subject in the Scriptures, and it is true that there is some measure of authority that God has given to elders in a church. Okay, in fact, they are to be obeyed according to the Scripture. So there is some level of authority that elders have, but they are not to exercise that authority in the church as lords over the church. And as he gets done explaining this position that the leadership of the church has, he breaks into this verse 5, likewise ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. And then he stops, as though if this is going to be a godlike quality, it has to apply to everybody now. Yea, all of you be subject one to another. Now, anybody who likes 1 Peter chapter 3 about wives being subject to their husband and does not equally like 1 Peter chapter 5 about all of us being subject to each other is a hypocrite and needs to get right with God. That's the truth. See, the authority that God gave a husband over a wife never was meant to be a lord in the home either. He was meant to be a leader and a provider. He was meant to be a servant. That's how God has exercises authority, and that is the authority that God has given to man. So we are all supposed to be subject to each other. Now we have a whole different idea in that verse about what it means to be humble. Listen to what he says. He quotes from the Psalms here when he says, Yea, all of you be subject one to another and be clothed with humility, for God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble. That is a quotation from the Psalms. Quotation or similar, maybe not exactly word for word, but if you go back to the Psalms and you look at the passage where that comes from in the Psalms, the word that is here translated humble is the Hebrew word that is translated meek most of the time in the Old Testament. All right? That is the Hebrew word for meek. In fact, it is the Hebrew word that is used in Numbers chapter 12 about Moses when he is called the meekest man on earth. We're going to that passage in a little bit. God giveth grace to the meek. All right, so because we're supposed to be like God, we submit to each other. Now, I wish that there was a bunch of people it would be actually probably to your advantage spiritually if there was a bunch of young people in this room who felt like they ought to listen to me, okay? I don't mean that in pride. I'm just telling the truth. Because if I can tell you something about what God says does or doesn't work in life and what is or isn't right, and you can listen to me, you'll benefit yourself and gain a few more years of peace than having to try the wrong things yourself, all right? So it would be nice if there was a few young people in this room who thought that it would be valuable to listen to me, all right? Whether you do or not doesn't affect me. But stop for a minute and just in your own head pick out the person that's sitting in this room that you would say is the most carnal person in the room. I hope we don't have any carnal people in this room. But let's just say you think there's somebody in this room that's carnal. Now, when the Bible says, yea, all of you be subject one to another, he's including that person in there too. Unfortunately, because that doesn't go good with your heart. So this is a mindset makeover you have to have here to get into the mindset that God is portraying here. He isn't coming here and telling you to be stupid. He's coming here and telling you to be like himself. Because God has this quality towards us, he wants us to have it towards each other. All right? Now, Galatians chapter 6. We'll go on to another one here. There's times that we have to do things in our lives that perhaps could be perceived as the opposite of meekness. So, if somebody needs discipline, or if somebody needs to be corrected, sometimes somebody just plain old needs to be yelled at. I mean, sometimes there's a time to use words that don't sound kind. All right? But listen to this verse here in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. Brethren, if any man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. So, suppose that there's somebody in this church here who gets their feet tangled up a little bit in something they shouldn't be doing, or they're not making the right choice. Let's just call it sin. Somebody sins. And you are found out to have been a sinner, to have done something wrong. Now, the favorite thing of human beings is to believe that we have the ability to help our fellow man, all right? It's a sick idea. It's a really sick idea. But every time we look at something wrong, we all think that we have the answer. And everybody always wants to take the person who didn't do the right thing and fix their life. All right. Very specifically, it is written here that if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one. Now let me just let God help you a little bit right here in understanding who is spiritual. All right? You happen to notice that we sit here with this verse in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1. And if you back up just a tiny little bit, you'll go back to Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22, which is what we're talking about this morning. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. Now, I'm going to say that if these things are portrayed here 3 verses earlier as being the fruit of the Spirit, then I'm going to say that if we're going to talk about ye which are spiritual, we're going to talk about people who have those fruits of the Spirit dwelling in their lives. All right? So, some of you guys have been sitting here, you didn't know I was going to say this morning, but you guys have been sitting here and you've been judging yourself based on these words that we've been studying. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith. And you've been going home and you've been saying, I don't measure up to that. I didn't meet the criteria for being that person. Now I'm going to tell you what God just said about you. he said, you aren't spiritual. And if one of your fellow man is overtaken in a fault, you probably aren't the person that has the intelligence or the ability to deal with that situation. Now, I'm going to be careful because I think to some degree all of us should be here to encourage and uplift each other. But there comes a point in a work where there is a soul who needs something, where they need correction in their life. And it is a very dangerous and delicate job. So those who live in the Spirit and walk in the Spirit and have these fruits in their life, they perhaps can take a struggling or a failing soul and might be able to turn that life around and make that life right again. But in the spirit of meekness, because if you look at yourself, you could be very easily guilty of the same sin. You could be tempted to do the same thing. Now, those were the things that we're going to look at here in the New Testament. There is many, many, many passages on the subject of meekness, many commands to be meek. Many times, both in the Old and the New Testament, that meekness is held up as a quality that we should have, and many blessings that are promised in the Scriptures to the meek. I'm not going to go over those this morning. We only have time to just give an overview of the subject. You guys can go home, get your concordance out, and study that this afternoon if you want. But I have one more place that we're going to go. We're going to go back to Numbers chapter 12, and we're going to bring a story out of Moses. And I'm going to show you some things about Moses. I think we should read the entire chapter. It's a short chapter. And get the context of what we're talking about here. So Numbers chapter 12 says, "And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth." That's a verse. "And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses and unto Aaron and unto Miriam, Come out, ye three, unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud, and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all my house. With him I will speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not this sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed, when he cometh out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, then should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her now be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people removed from Hazeroth and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. So, this is a good story, a simple little story about Moses, and he had a brother and a sister working with him in this leading the children of Israel from the land of Egypt to the promised land. I guess that's a good thing to have a good brother and a sister working with you, but you know how brothers and sisters tend to be. They tend to be a little bit judgmental towards each other and fight with each other a little bit and so on. And so Aaron and Miriam decided that Moses had taken too much on him and thought it was wrong that the scripture was being written by Moses. They didn't recognize that at the moment, that this was going to be the eternal word of God that Moses was giving them. But all these things that Moses was saying were becoming law in the congregation, the very word of God. And they began to complain about this position that Moses held as having all this authority and saying, did God only speak by Moses? Didn't he speak by us too? And Moses didn't care that they said that, because speaking against a person who is meek, they don't have a good reason to defend themselves. That's not a good Christian quality. Self-defense is not a good Christian quality. So Moses didn't really care that they said that because he was meek. But God cared because they were wrong. And in fact, he was establishing the very value of his word, and the fact that Moses himself wasn't the author of the word, but God himself was. And so he called the three of them to come out to the tabernacle of the congregation and gave Aaron and Miriam a little bit of a lecture about the fact that he had a relationship with Moses he didn't have with them. Very simple. All right? And then Miriam ends up becoming leprous, and Moses has to pray for her healing, and so on. But I want to give you the background to this story, because you remember that Moses grew up as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. He grew up in luxury, training, education, wealth. Whatever Egypt had, Moses had it. That was his position. And when he got to be 40 years old, he decided that he didn't want it. He gave it all up. That'll be in Hebrews chapter 11 tonight. We'll be going through that tonight. He gave that all up, and he went out to his own people, the Hebrews, and he decided that he would rather have their afflictions than the wealth that Egypt had, because he traded his position as a son of Pharaoh's daughter for being a son of God. It was a good trade. But when he went out, he was 40 years old, and he was above all of his brothers, all the people of Israel. He had been educated in Pharaoh's household. He had power and money. And now this man Moses, he's elevated himself in his own mind. And so he went out of Pharaoh's house and immediately became a judge. And he ends up finding an Egyptian man smiting a Hebrew. And he kills the guy right on the spot and buries him in the sand. Now, whether or not the Egyptian deserved to die is irrelevant. We've got a problem here in Moses. He can't be this way if he's going to be a leader of God's people. So he hides the guy in the sand. The next day, he finds two of the Hebrews, and they're having an argument, and he immediately walks up as the judge to set the matter straight. And they say, "Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" And Moses is like, "Uh-oh, everybody knows," and so he runs for his life. Now, setting yourself up always is going to bring you to a place of trouble. And so lift yourself up, you come crashing down, and that's exactly what happened in Moses' life. He ran for his life and went out to the desert, met a guy out there in the desert, and begins to work for him to take care of his sheep. And for 40 years, Moses had no ministry. He had no life but a desert life. He had nowhere to exercise all of his talents. He just became a sheep farmer for 40 years. At the end of 40 years, God had broken Moses from being this man who could to a man who couldn't. And that was exactly where God wanted him. And after God took Moses through that desert trial of 40 years with nothing, where the only thing he did was farm sheep. How many of you guys, I believe this is an error, a great, great, great error in Christianity today. We look down on what we call low-paying jobs. I actually think that low-paying jobs offer greater spiritual benefit than most high-paying jobs in life. Those who actually work for an income and take home enough to live off, but not to get rich off, will find themselves in a better position spiritually most of the time than people who have the other kind of jobs. But we look down on those kind of jobs, and we are sending our children across Christianity, even conservative churches, en masse to college to get that education which will get them that good job, not realizing not only is that good job not necessarily good for them, but that college is absolutely horribly detrimental to them. I believe that. In fact, many Christian kids who enter those schools of this world never come back out to serve God again. But anyway, that's what we think. And then we want to be those kind of a people who we laugh with the world about somebody who works at Burger King. I don't. I hope none of you guys do, but I've heard it happen many times that we laugh at those people. Somebody, I actually have heard people in this very church laugh at people who work at Golden Harvest as though they were some lower form of humanity. I've actually heard people do that. It's sad. Golden Harvest is a good place to work. No, it doesn't make people rich. That's true. It doesn't make people rich. But it's actually a nice, decent environment, and we've got 70 hours a week for those of you who need more money. All right, so if we look down on those menial jobs, let me tell you what that kind of a job did when God wanted to take a proud man who was 40 years in luxury and get him to a position where God himself would say about Moses that he was the meekest man on earth. That's a statement. God can see everybody. He knows the insides of everybody's hearts. He knows every little baby that lives in Eskimo land. He knew everybody on earth, and he looked down on the earth, and knowing every single man on earth, he looked at Moses and he said, Moses is the meekest man that lives on this earth today. That's what God said about him. When God wanted to take Moses from that proud man educated in Pharaoh's house and bring him to a place where he would do just exactly what God told him to do, wouldn't change anything he said, would be an absolute servant to the people, and someone who could bear the sins of 1 million people for 40 years in a desert. When he needed a man to do that, what he did was he found this Moses and he put him for 40 years taking care of sheep. Now, how many of you guys have an education level that is good for taking care of sheep? I do, because I have no education at all, okay? How many of you guys could imagine hearing most American people saying, I am educated above being a farmer? You know, my job title is higher than being a farmer. It doesn't take any skill to be a sheep farmer. Anybody can be a farmer. That's not 100%, because obviously you have to have skill in any job you perform. But the scientist who can think thoughts that are beyond the average intelligence to even understand or comprehend would look at a job like that, and anybody can learn that job. Anybody can be a farmer. All right? But what Moses did there in the desert for 40 years, being a farmer to those sheep, was he was taught to care for things. He was taught he was taught that he himself, being a servant to a flock of animals for 40 years, was a good life to live. That's what he was taught. And so all that ruler idea that he had when he walked out of Pharaoh's house disappeared from his life. And then I want you to stop and imagine for a minute all the things that Moses faced when he was leading Israel through the wilderness. And you know, whenever anything was wrong in the wilderness, you know what the people did? They came and complained to Moses. That's what they did. Why didn't they go complain to God? Well, God was a little bit harder to talk to. They did complain at God too. But mostly they came and complained to Moses. And what was Moses' response to the people when they came? Now let me give you what a modern American Christian's response would be. I need therapy. I need some books. I need to see a specialist. I'm sad and depressed and discouraged. These people are wrecking my life. I need to see a doctor. And you know what Moses had to do under the stress that they put him through? He had to go to God and request that God spare their lives because they were about to die. God needed somebody who was meek enough that they cared nothing at all about self-defense. He needed somebody that was meek enough that he wouldn't spend any time whatsoever working on his reputation. He needed somebody who could think clearly and know that there was an emergency situation there where these people in sin were going to face the judgment of God if God didn't forgive them. And he just took the people as they complained and murmured and yelled at him and said all sorts of evil things about it. He just took them right to God and said, God, forgive the people. That's what God needed. Now, I feel sort of like that was almost exactly like who Jesus was when he was on the earth. You know, Isaiah chapter 53 says he was like as a sheep before his shears is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. And that's exactly what happened when he was brought before the judgment. You know, Jesus had the power to come down from the cross when they told him to. He had the power through the infinite mind of God to have cleared himself of any guilt before Pilate, had he wanted to. He had amazing wisdom in words. But he was taken before the judgment, and these people are yelling and screaming and witnessing against him and lying about him. And Pilate looks at him and says, "Aren't you going to answer them? Don't you have anything to say?" But he didn't. He had nothing to say because he was going to the cross. And when he was nailed to the cross, and he took on him the sin of the people who were there, who had nailed him to the cross, he let the whole world watch him die as a condemned sinner. 3 days later, he rose from the dead, and he never went and saw any of them. He never wrote a letter. There was not one word of self-defense come out of his mouth. Why didn't Jesus walk back to the temple and walk into the office of the high priest and say, "I'm back"? Why didn't he? He had no reputation to defend because he didn't care about that, because he had come to save, not to condemn. So the fruit of the Spirit is meekness. And the fruit of the Spirit is meekness because Jesus eternally is meek. And he's lowly. And that's what we are supposed to be if we're going to follow him. We are supposed to be those people who are meek. It brings out love and kindness. It keeps us from being judgmental. It makes us easy to get along with. Peacemakers. We still fight sin. Jesus never gave up the fight for sin. The fruit of the Spirit is meekness. Let's take a break.